have the remote viewing focus on earthly targets, not extraterrestrial type stuff. So this was one project that had 3 extraterrestrial targets. And the first one was the base on Mars in Cydonia. We wanted to know what that was and what it was like when it was in its prime. We wanted to know what this anomaly is on the wall of a crater that looks like some structures, very clear structures in a NASA photograph, on Iapetus, and we wanted to know what that was. And then we also wanted to know about the Phoenix lights. And so I got 3 extraterrestrial targets in one go. If I assign my remote viewers extraterrestrial targets again, they might quit on me, so we're going to be staying close to home. But still really exciting projects after this. So we got 3 extraterrestrial ones at a go, and this is the middle one, Iapetus. And it's really one of the most bizarre and interesting projects that exists. The asteroid belt was once a planet. The planet exploded, and it caused a huge debris wave. And because Iapetus is tidally locked and has no atmosphere, it was holding still while the debris wave passed, and that's what hit it. That was a theory that was developed by Thomas Van Flandern, who was a very mainstream astronomer, head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics for many years at the Naval Observatory in the U.S. He doesn't cover the reason for the explosion, but that there was a planet, it did explode. Mainstream science says the asteroid belt came from junk that was left over from the primordial solar nebula. Well, that's ridiculous. The primordial solar nebula is dust, and you can't get solid, huge rocks out of dust. Dust doesn't make a rock. A rock forms when a gravity well pulls all the dust together to produce a planet that compresses the dust into a rock. That's how you get a rock. So the big asteroids had to have come from a big planet. Iapetus has been a great puzzle for many years, and we now have a little bit of an answer for some of the puzzles. There has been some alien activity on Iapetus. I suspect that people have been involved and interested in Iapetus going back hundreds of millions of years, long before humans were interested in it. I suspect that's been an interesting place for a long time. When the remote viewing was actually done, it's clear that the remote viewers, Dick Allgaier and Daz Smith, did not know that this project had anything to do with Iapetus. And the interesting thing from this particular project is the level of verifiable data is huge, meaning we have the perfect picture of the anomaly. We have a perfect picture of Iapetus. We have a perfect picture of the crater, all supplied by the Cassini space probe, supplied by NASA. So we have a ton of verifiable stuff. We know it's a crater, a meteor crater. We know it's on an airless moon. We know it's dry, rocky, barren environment. We know all that. We know there's a lot of debris, meteor-type debris scattered all about. So all that is verifiable. Now, the verifiable stuff, which is the crater, the moon, airless moon, rocky, barren terrain, meteor stuff, all that has to be perfect. That's verifiable because we know that to be true. That stuff was some of the best remote viewing I've ever seen done. He described the verifiable components of this project so perfectly my jaw dropped. His description would not have been a little bit better had he been an astronaut who flew there and walked around. Daz's sessions are really interesting for a couple reasons. He clearly describes the verifiable stuff, exactly right. And then he goes on to describe the structure. But he also says that the reason, when he goes back in time, he says there's a crater. And he said at one point there was a meteor that crashed here and produced this crater, but that the location for building these buildings here was chosen for some special purpose. It's a special spot. It's not just a random spot. And he described how both in the past and especially in the past there was a beam of energy that would come down and hit the buildings. Now, I don't know what that was about, but it could have been a form of power generation, because you can generate power elsewhere and then beam it in as a microwave. And that's a well-known technology even today. But it could have been something else. But nonetheless, the energy was from outside going into the structures. The structures themselves are really curious. Now, if you think about it, that location on Iapetus was arguably, probably still is, the most beautiful location in the entire solar system. You're there on an icy, barren moon. You have this incredible palatial set of structures that's there. And right above you is Saturn, all the rings of Saturn, and a completely unfettered star field because there's no atmosphere. It must have been the most beautiful location imaginable. Now, they obviously had means of transportation, like our current UFOs and stuff like that, that could get there in like an hour or two. They obviously didn't use chemical rockets to go back and forth. So, transportation was not an issue. But the building of that was not to spy. It was not to manufacture. It was not as a military thing. It was a place to commune with nature, to be like, think of it as Zen, like a Zen communal spiritual retreat. And the pictures themselves clearly show a set of buildings that have curved facades. There's big windows on the sides of them and horizontal windows. And then they also have like a staircase that's on the side that turns at a right angle. I don't think it was a staircase, but it looks like stairs. And originally, when it was done, we can see this from the sessions where they go back in time, they had coverings over the entire thing. And one of the sort of covering was like, Dick Elgar describes it as like the St. Louis Arch tipped over on its side. Anyway, it's a fascinating thing. The other thing that's interesting is that the facility itself was eventually abandoned. And it was abandoned because of a war that took place elsewhere. The war did not directly impact Iapetus, meaning they weren't bombarded or anything like that. But the war happened elsewhere, and that stopped all supply ships. Now, nothing grows on Iapetus. There's no water, there's no air, there's no food. So everything had to be brought in. And when the war happened, all the supply ships stopped. Now, because of our past remote viewing projects, we do know that the asteroid belt was created from a planet that exploded. So the fact that it exploded suggests that it might have exploded as an act of war, and that would have caused the debris wave to spread out throughout the solar system, and that produced a black splotch on Iapetus. Now, some of the people on Iapetus, you can assume, had access to ships and could have left, but where would they have gone? Maldek didn't exist anymore, and Mars was a complete wasteland. Where do you go? And so what happened, and this is in the remote viewing data, the supply ships stopped, and the people that were on Iapetus died there. They ran out of food, they ran out of water, they ran out of air. And if we go to Iapetus today, and we send our own spacecraft there and walk through that facility, we are very likely going to see the bones or the dust of the bones of the people who died there. The actual dating for this has got some pretty good markers for it. Thomas Van Flandern went into some of it, and he suggests that we might be looking at a window like 10 million years, which is not that long ago. And the reason why he suggests that, and he suggests that there's some indications that it might even been closer than that, so not even 10 million years out. Buildings with subterranean chambers seems to be a characteristic element of a lot of this. And Mars, a lot of stuff was underground. As you can see in our Cydonia project that was released 2 months ago, there is not only a lot of chambers under the so-called face on Mars, but there's tunnels, extensive tunnels, and the tunnels extend all throughout the planet. So there's good evidence, both photographic evidence from NASA-supplied pictures of tunnels that have been exposed because of erosion, as well as the remote viewing data that suggests that a primary means of transportation around the entire planet in those days was by train. underground train. So trains definitely were a major source of transportation. And those trains were more like the maglev trains that we have today. They were fast. I mean, they were unbelievably fast. They were like our jets of today. They were fast. And I mean, even our maglev trains traveling in Japan and Europe, they go up to 200 miles an hour in some cases when they're in perfect operating condition. Well, these ones seem to go faster than that. Really, really, really fast. And now the facilities on Iapetus, you can assume, probably did not have trains. We have no remote viewing data for tunnels like that extensively go throughout the planet, throughout the moon. What we see on Iapetus is just chambers underneath the surface facilities. So that's a different sort of thing. There wasn't a subway system or anything like that. The beings that were on Mars and Iapetus, they clearly did not see us remote viewing them. They looked like us, they acted like us, and they did not perceive us just like us. Because when you remote view humans cannot tell. And so I like to say that they were us when we were there. So if you want to know what the beings were like on Iapetus, just look around. They were like us. However, they were very rich. They were the elite. But the Cydonia Mars people, those were different. Those were people that ranged from poor people in shantytown areas up to very rich people, middle class as well. And there was a variety of buildings on that location as well. So you had sort of a mix. But in Iapetus, the whole facility was a palace. It was covered so that, it had to contain the air. I think that thing that looks like a set of steps along the side that has a right angle to it, I think just looking at it, there's a possibility it might have been like a waterfall. It would have been artificial, of course, but part of the rich communion nature of it because of the rippling down and so on. It's clearly an artificial thing, because just looking at the picture of it. But it's way too big to be a staircase where you actually walk up. So it had to have some type of other purpose for it. It's a fascinating project with a very unusual set of structures that were used for an extraordinary purpose that really tell us a little bit about ourselves. Because if we had a person on our planet that was rich enough to be able to do that and had the transportation capabilities to do that, he or she would probably do it. They'd build something like that. And that's what happened. There has been huge level of activity in our own solar system over a great period of time, and we're slowly waking up to that. Remote viewing clearly shows you can transfer perceptual information across time and space, and information from a physicist's point of view is the same as energy, literally. Like when you destroy information, you just think of information as stuff you know. But in reality, information is organized stuff, and when you destroy information, you actually release energy in the form of heat. So when you're transferring information across time and space, you're transferring energy, and E equals mc squared, energy equals mass. So physicists are basically dealing with the fundamental paradigms of quantum mechanics and relativistic physics that date back over 100 years. They haven't changed in their fundamentals for over 100 years. So they're wrong just because of that. Nothing in science stays that stable. There's always advancement. Now, the mathematics have improved. As a mathematician, I can appreciate, the advances that have been made. For example, they have merged the Copenhagen interpretation in quantum mechanics with relativistic physics to come up with the standard model. They can do quantum computing now. They have refined things a lot, but the fundamentals haven't changed since over 100 years. So really what we're talking about is not a challenge to the mathematics, but a challenge to the interpretation of quantum mechanics and the implications to that to macro reality. So we're talking about a generalization of quantum mechanics with a new interpretation of quantum mechanics that is fundamentally tied back to a theory that was developed by Hugh Everett and published in his dissertation in 1957. He studied under John Wheeler in Princeton. And that's called the other worlds interpretation of the two-slit experiment. And we're headed towards a realm where that becomes the dominant paradigm. Now, back in those days, in the late 1950s and 60s, essentially only Hugh Everett believed this new interpretation. But now approximately 18% of mainstream physicists have adopted the other worlds interpretation as the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics. But that still means 82% are stuck in the old Copenhagen interpretation days, which is a really bizarre interpretation of quantum mechanical experiments. So what we're really waiting for is that 18% is younger generally than the Copenhagen supporters. And so we're waiting for retirement to produce generational replacement. And so eventually physicists will have a alternate perspective that becomes dominant that does in fact allow for the remote viewing phenomenon to exist.